Vamos a dar inicio a la conferencia magistral del Leach. Estamos muy contentos, muy contentas de tenerle aquí. Ahora estábamos platicando que le gusta mucho México, entonces creo que es algo muy lindo para esta plática. Y bueno, no tiene más, el doctor Ronald Bolaños Linares lo va a presentar, pero bueno, a nombre de la facultad y a nombre del doctor Jiménez Fuertes, nuestro director, les damos la bienvenida al Teatro Estefanía Chávez Barragán a esta conferencia magistral sobre inteligencia artificial, que sabemos que es un tema que tenemos que tratar, que tenemos que abordar desde la educación y pues seguramente nos será de mucho provecho escuchar esta plática. Sean todos y todas bienvenidas y bienvenido Neil y a señor secretario. Welcome to University, to the School of Architecture. So we are very pleased to have you here, and now Ronald is going to present you.
Gracias a todos por venir. Buenas tardes. Cabe comentar que esto ha sido posible gracias también a Bitácora Arquitectura, la revista de la facultad, también a la colaboración con el doctor Daniel Dow y un servidor a través del Laboratorio de Arquitectura, Magistral y Tecnología Experimental, LATE. Me voy a permitir leer una semblanza sobre Neil Leach. Neil Leach es arquitecto, curador y escritor. Ha sido profesor visitante de la GSD de Harvard y actualmente es profesor de la Universidad Internacional de Florida. Ha sido profesor de la Escuela de Graduados Europea, profesor Gauffin en la Universidad Conji y profesor adjunto de la Universidad del Sur de California. También ha impartido clases en SciArt, Architecture Association en la Columbia, GSAPP, Cornell University, the Soy Institute of Architecture, en el Instituto de Arquitectura Avanzada de Cataluña, en el consorcio londinense, en el Royal Danish School of Fine Arts, en ESARC, en University of Nottingham, en la University of Bath y en la Universidad de Praga. Sus intereses de investigación se dividen en términos generales en dos campos: la teoría crítica y el diseño digital. En el campo de la teoría crítica ha publicado varias monografías y volúmenes editados, abordando en gran medida el impacto de importación de herramientas teóricas de la teoría crítica al ámbito arquitectónico. Estos incluyen Repensar la arquitectura, un lector de teoría cultural de Routledge, de 1997, Los anestésicos de la arquitectura, del MIT, en 1999, La cultura milenaria, Elipsis 99, Arquitectura y revolución, perspectivas contemporáneas sobre Europa central y oriental, también de Routledge, Los jeroglíficos del espacio, lectura y experiencia de la metrópolis moderna, de Routledge, Camuflaje, del MIT en 2006. En el campo de diseño digital ha publicado varios volúmenes editados, entre ellos Designing for a Digital World, de Wiley en 2002, Digital Tectonics, también de Wiley, Digital Cities, también de Wiley, y 3D Printed Body Architecture, de la misma editorial. También ha sido co-curador de la exposición Fast Forward en la Bienal de Arquitectura de Beijing en 2004, la exposición Emerging Talents, Emerging Technologies en la Bienal de Arquitectura de Beijing de 2006 y la exposición In Material Processes, New Digital Techniques for Architecture en la Bienal de Arquitectura de Beijing en 2008. Así que gracias Neil por aceptar la invitación. Thank you Neil for accepting this invitation, and you're very welcome. Lo recibimos con favor.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It doesn't take much to get into Mexico. In fact, I live in northern Mexico, and I'm from British, I'm from Europe, I'm not from America, and I have to say I find Mexican culture much more rich than American. Last night we went around the streets of Mexico City and it was just astonishing. I also am very much indebted to Manuel de Landa, who's a Mexican philosopher and street philosopher. And when I was teaching in Columbia, I went to all his seminars. I became a student. He was incredible at his influence on me. So thank you for the invitation. I love being in Mexico. So, let me start. I don't know if you recognize that music is the opening scene of 2001: A Space Odyssey, which has been viewed by the critics as the most significant movie of all time. And it starts off not with this monolith, but with another monolith. And the story is a little enigmatic. But the monolith that appears at the beginning of 2001: A Space Odyssey has been sent there by an alien civilization, and they call it the first book. And they put these monoliths there to try and encourage the development of the civilization. And this was in the very early prehistory of Earth when they put these monoliths here. A kind of catalyst. Eventually, this alien civilization, the firstborn, become totally immaterial. They become a form of intelligence. But I started mainly because the theme of alien intelligence is something that I find that's the best way to describe AI. It's a form of intelligence that is very, very different to our intelligence, but nonetheless superior. So I want to explain today what I mean by alien intelligence in introducing what AI is. So this is the kind of thing I think many of you have been doing on Mid-Journey. What I find so interesting, I was talking to one of the colleagues here today, is that you see the fashion outfit, you see the chair, and you might slightly see a bit of a car. These are using a prompt in which all I do is change the word from building to furniture to fashion to car. There's something interesting now across the whole spectrum of design that is coming out because of the use of AI. So today is actually the second tour. I'm going around the world giving a lecture all over the place, all about AI. And anyway, so thank you for the invitation. So I'm just showing you some Mid-Journey images. You can all do this, I'm sure. And then they're just going to flick through in the background. So maybe I could just outline my position about AI. First of all, I'm absolutely amazed by AI. But I'm also completely terrified. And every day I get more terrified by AI because it is so amazing. And I recognized very early on that it has these two sides, being both amazing and terrifying. And when I started working on my first book, I felt kind of compromised. I was writing about AI, but I was writing about something that was so incredible but also terrifying. I felt like Elon Musk, who was working with AI, but telling us it could be the end of civilization. So I managed to persuade my publishers, Bloomsbury. Bloomsbury are based in Bedford Square in London, right next to the Architectural Association, and they publish Harry Potter books. I managed to persuade them to divide it into two books. One with a white cover, like The Angel, the good side of AI, and that's the book that's being published. And one with a black cover, like The Devil, the dark side of AI, the Black Mirror episode of AI. And I've been planning to put the second one off for a long time, so I could write some more positive books about AI. But it seems that history is upon us sooner than we thought. And we are seeing something terrifying in front of you. It's not, though, that AI is dangerous in itself. It's simply a tool, at least for the moment. You can't make decisions. It's not autonomous. And like any tool, it depends on who uses it and for what. I can take a kitchen knife and I can cut my vegetables, or I can murder you with my kitchen knife. But so far, no kitchen knife has ever been convicted of murder. So the challenge then is how do we deal with this tool? These images are completely superficial. This is not AI. This is simply an application of AI. And I want to talk today about AI itself. So they're totally superficial, and I think there'll be something else that will completely change architectural design culture coming out of AI, and I'll mention that briefly. So these are totally superficial, but there is something extraordinary about these images, which I will also try and bring out towards the end. So I would encourage you to start exploring these things. AI is going to have a huge impact on our world. It is going to radically transform everything that we know, and it is going to radically transform architecture itself. We need to adapt in order to survive, and we can't ignore it. We have to take it on board. So let me flip through the remaining slides. So my talk today is going to be divided into three sections. What is AI? We'll use the term AI, but not many people seem to know actually what it means. Most people use Midjourney or ChatGPT. Then I'm going to give a brief history of AI, because the history is very, very brief. And AI essentially hasn't really taken off until around the millennium. And finally, who's afraid of AI? So, what is AI? Well, I mean, a shorthand definition is it's like a digital brain. It's like a digital brain. But I like this definition by Margaret Bowden, and I use this a lot. Research in AI seeks to make computers do the sorts of things that minds can do. And the important thing is here that she's connecting computers to the mind, because the logic of neural networks applies in some sense to both. There are two ways, though, in which this no longer is true. Firstly, because AI can do things in some areas much better than us. There's no point in us taking on AI at chess or Go anymore, because it would beat us. And ChatGPT knows 10,000 times more than any of us. I also think that there are some things it doesn't need to achieve. I don't think it needs to achieve consciousness. As far as I'm concerned, if my toaster can make good toast without being conscious, I'm happy. If AI can produce good designs without being conscious, I'm happy. But when ChatGPT was launched, I think November the 3rd, 2022, I think it was a wake-up call for everyone. I found out about it the next day. I don't know if you remember this. This was the Football World Cup, the quarterfinals. Brazil playing Croatia. And my colleague from Digital Futures, Angelica Poncio, was watching the match. And you probably remember, Brazil was leading 3-0, then they 3-all, then they went to penalties. And this guy, Neymar, didn't take the penalty. He was number 5 in the list, and they'd already lost the match and didn't take the penalty. So Angelica went to ChatGPT and said, who should have taken the first penalty? And ChatGPT said the best player should have taken the first penalty. It should have been Neymar. Now, at that moment, I thought, holy shit, this thing's going to be incredibly useful, not just for football, but for architecture. What material should I specify for this wall? But also for clients, like, what material should I specify for this wall? They don't need the architect, perhaps. So all of a sudden, we realize that it has this incredible capacity. So what is AI? The most important difference between AI and the human brain is the fact that AI is not conscious, it's not sentient, it's not self-aware, and so on and so on. But what you get here basically are two forms of neural networks. AI, on the right-hand side, is loosely modeled on the brain, on the left-hand side, the neural networks of the brain. And it uses the same terminology, but it's not necessarily the same thing. So this is going to help me illustrate. These circular things, this is called a neuron, and these lines that are joining them are called synapses. And the flow of information goes from left to right, and that flow of information is governed by the weights on the synapses. But although we're using the same terminology, it's very different. It's simply loosely modeled. The neurons are not the same as the neurons of the brain, and the synapses are not the same as the synapses of the brain. And indeed, the neural network is not the same as the neural network of the brain. And indeed, intelligence, AI, is not the same as human intelligence. That's why I use the term alien intelligence. AI is not a robot. And it's certainly not a humanoid robot. Hanson Robotics, who manufactured Sophia, would like you to believe that AI is a robot. A robot is no more AI than a Tesla car is AI. It might use AI, it might be controlled by AI, but it is not AI. If you want to understand what AI is, don't think humanoid robot, think code, think algorithms, think programming. AI is essentially software, very sophisticated software, but software nonetheless. So in the office of the future, we are going to be surrounded by AI, but we're not going to be surrounded by humanoid robots. In fact, we are already surrounded by AI. Not everyone is completely aware. AI is what filters out the spam on email. It's what finishes your sentences on Gmail. It's what allows you to order Uber cars. It's what allows you to translate things in WeChat. It's doing all these things the whole time on our personal devices, on our personal monoliths, as it were. And I made this comment in my book. This is the comment I'm most proud about. It is as though the Earth has been invaded by an invisible, super intelligent alien species, because it is truly alien. So, then just maybe briefly, and it is a very brief history of AI, and don't let anyone tell you that it goes back to 2,000 years. AI doesn't go back that far. Alan Turing was perhaps the first person to conceptualize the possibility of computers and intelligence, in the essays that he published in 1951. But it wasn't until 1955 that the term artificial intelligence was coined for a meeting that took place in 1956 in Dartmouth College, a workshop in Dartmouth College, where all the smartest people in the States, and we've got, this is Marvin Minsky, for example, Paul Shannon is here, I think that's John McCarthy, I don't know, but anyway, John McCarthy was the guy who invented the term. He didn't really like the term, as he put it, I have to call it something. They wanted to distinguish it from cybernetics at the time. And it's not a good term. It's not artificial at all. It might be synthetic, but it's not artificial. And as soon as you use the word intelligent, you kind of anthropomorphize it and think of it as artificial intelligence. Anyway, in 2006, this group of the survivors, as it were, got back together to reconvene on the 50th anniversary of the original meeting. And they have to say, well, really, AI has failed. We haven't achieved anything that we hoped to. They hoped to sort out in 2 years the basic principles. They hadn't achieved anything. There'd been a lot of hype about AI, but AI failed to deliver. The most important thing they wanted to use it for was translation. They wanted to know what the Soviets were saying, but it was really bad translation. There was a famous case when they tried to translate out of sight as out of mind into Russian and back into English, and it came out as an invisible lunatic. So it failed. And in 2006, they also said, and it's not going to achieve much in the future either. But by a strange coincidence, 2006 was roughly the time when the work of this guy, Geoffrey Hinton, began to hit the scene. Geoffrey Hinton had been, in the first 50 years, there have been many different approaches towards AI, and the approach that was trying to model it on the brain was out of favor. It hadn't been working. And Marvin Minsky had even written a book trashing it and saying it's achieved nothing, it's going nowhere. And instead they were focusing on symbolic AI based on logic. Now, Geoffrey Hinton is a very interesting character. He actually studied architecture for 2 days at the University of Cambridge. And then he decided to change. When I was talking about this to Marta Sicario of Foster and Partners, she said, he's a smart guy. It took me 5 years to realize I shouldn't have done architecture. But in fact, he'd worked in an office beforehand and realized what it was about. But then he went into studying the mind. He's the great-grandson of George Boole of Boolean geometry fame, and really smart guy. He was studying the mind, and by total coincidence, he was doing a neural network to try and model how the mind works, and he started getting very effective results in AI. And then, in around 2000, when GPUs were invented, graphic processing units, and they were invented for gaming, but they suddenly discovered they could make computers much more powerful, much more fast. All of a sudden, neural networks began to work. So these are the reasons, but the first one is by far the most important. What happened? Why did neural networks take off? Why did deep learning take off? That's what it is. And it's largely because of the incredible computing power and speed of computers. So they're of course getting better and better all the time. So if you understand what deep learning is, it's a kind of subset of machine learning, which is a subset of artificial intelligence. We still use the term artificial intelligence, but if you can think what it meant in 1956 to what it meant now, there's a bigger difference than, say, the first ever car with Model T Ford or whatever, and a Tesla self-driving car. The difference is absolutely vast. It's really only since around 2006 that deep learning has taken off, and it's completely transformed everything. In fact, the moment when it happened was around 2012, when Jeffrey Hinton, with his team, which was pushing deep learning and neural networks, they entered a competition to recognize images. Now, image identification, facial recognition, we take for granted. You all have it on our phones now, but in 2012, it did not exist. And in the competition, Jeffrey Hinton and his team of PhD students came in, and they were using neural networks, and everyone was joking about it. That's an absolute obsolete technology, like a steam engine or something, and they wiped the floor. They completely wiped the floor. And all of a sudden, everyone thought, yes, neural networks, I always thought they had promise, and they all changed to neural networks. Fei Li describes the moment, and maybe she's exaggerating, but she says, you know, it was about like the world's speed record was beaten by 100 miles an hour by someone driving a Honda Civic. I don't know if that's true or not, but it was really a shock, and all of a sudden we changed to neural networks, because neural networks, which are behind ChatGPT, behind the journey, that's what's going on now. Now, the Holy Grail, of course, that was an important step forward, but actually, so you started with a picture of a bird, and then it works its way through, and you come up with a conclusion. So bird's never 100% sure, it's 99% sure, but pretty much you recognize the bird. Now, but the Holy Grail of computer science is going to work the other way, to start with the word bird and end up with a picture of the bird. And the first advance was this thing called Deep Dream, developed by an engineer from Google called Alex Morvinson. And here you can see a neural network that's been trained on, and it's like dogs and serpents and I don't know, that's like an oil lamp down here or something. But basically when you use this and you start looking at images, it starts reading dogs and serpents into everything. But it's all over the place. It's like a trippy picture because it's lost information about where to position things, and therefore it's kind of trippy. The first exhibition on AI generated art was based on this, but it wasn't long before we moved on to something very special. Ian Goodfellow, who was also in Montreal, also in Canada, was a PhD student who devised what are called generative adversarial networks. And these are based on two different networks. One is a generator, which is producing images from random noise, and one is a discriminator, which is deciding whether or not those images are convincing or not against a training set, and then deciding if it's real or fake. It's a bit like, let's say, someone producing a fake Van Gogh, an art critic saying whether or not it's convincing. But in the process, the discriminator begins to train the generator how to produce better images. It's learning the whole time. And this led to this huge breakthrough with style GANs and other techniques, where you would train these GANs on incredible amounts of data. It was very laborious, and you have to be a computational expert, or to have advice from a computational expert to do it. But you can see it was remarkably good at generating faces. There is actually a website you can go to called "This Person Does Not Exist," and every time you you refresh the browser, a new face appears. These are deep fakes. None of this is real. There's also a site you can go to. This cat does not exist. And there was once a site which is this building does not exist. Anyway, the first person to really generate a building was Refik Anadol. In 2019, I put in a submission to curate the British Pavilion at the Venice Biennale with Zaha Hadid Architects with Refik Anadol, who's now a rock star, and Google. This was a dream team, sponsored by Google. I couldn't imagine a better team. We didn't get anywhere. No one was interested in AI in 2019. Anyway, Refik basically took it upon himself to do what we were planning to do, and that is to hallucinate buildings. He took the entire data set of Zaha Hadid architects and ran it through and trained a GAN on it, and then you can then use it to hallucinate, return the views, hallucinate another design that could have been designed by Zaha. Even though Zaha is no longer with us, it's possible to generate something that looks like her work. Now this seems very crude compared to what we do now, but here you have emerging out of the computer what I think is the first design, shall we say, generated through GAN. And there we have it. And that was the image that I put on the first couple of my books, which is just coming out in the second editions, and I hope it comes out in Spanish. I've asked that they could do royalties, translation royalties free, so hopefully it comes out in Spanish. And that was the first image. But it wasn't long before the architects had taken that further. Daniel Bolajan, who's really the great genius, I think, AI in architecture. There are a lot of people around who really don't know what they're talking about, but say they do. Daniel does. And he's been working with Koch Noblau. He's now a professor at Florida Atlantic University. And this is called cycle GANs, where you breed architecture off against something else. And it means you extrapolate. Style GANs, you only have averaging or getting a blend, as it were, of the previous thing. They were kind of new, but they were operating within a finite data set. This one you could breed, you could extrapolate. And in 2021, this was the state of the art. This was the best that we had. This was the image we used on the front cover of the second book I did, Machine Hallucinations, an AD. But then something else happened. And that was basically diffusion models. And this was the enormous breakthrough that happened. These don't work the same way. I won't go into it, but it's based on basically, it's based on a diffusion process where you erode an image and then regenerate it and so on. But it's straightforward. It's based on a pre-trained data set, so you haven't got to load up a train data set. It operates within 3 seconds, it's very quick, and the resolution is much better. Now, importantly, this was one of the scenes that really surprised people. Now, AI, some people think AI is copying, or stealing data. Well, maybe you do it if you just take data off that's copyrighted straight off the web. But AI doesn't copy. So this, for example, is an astronaut on the horse. That was the prompt. It's based on prompts, so it becomes words to image. And there's never been an astronaut horse. We don't think there has been. But nonetheless, it can extrapolate, it can imagine what it would have been to have an astronaut on a horse. And this was really quite a breakthrough. I was talking about this in the AA and saying, well, when it's going to happen in architecture, and Patrick Schumacher was there and said, it's already happened. And they've been working with Refik Anadol and producing this kind of thing, which you can see is much better than the first image that will be produced. Anyway, the rest is history, and we all know what Midjourney and Dali can produce. Now, what is happening here? Well, this is not working the same way as a GAN, but somehow the model works, because basically, I don't think that human beings are that creative, despite what we think. But we're very good at discriminating. We're very good at judging things. If you sip a cocktail, smell a perfume, instantaneously you can tell if you like it or not. But I don't think we've got much imagination. What's happening is basically Midjourney are generating other options. They're trying out other options, so it becomes a prosthesis to human imagination and leads to, I think, better improved performances. Now, I'm not going to talk about the world of professional architecture. Alongside that, of course, there are other softwares appearing, surrogate models. It's called infrared, which is basically looking at environmental performance. We also have Amoeba, which is looking at structures and things. And this is, I think, is where it's going to be really happening in the future, where we're going to use AI generatively and to improve the performance of everything that we're doing. There are a few companies. SpaceMaker now, former board of Autodesk, But this person, I think she's one of my doctoral candidates. She's going to change the world. She has a company called X-Cool. She used to work for Rem Koolhaas at OMA, and she was so frustrated by OMA, right? Because they were just doing the sketches, throwing them away, starting again, and they were working at the time in Hong Kong, in Lang Kwai Fong, which is the nightclub district. And they were working till 2 in the morning over the weekends, and everyone was having fun downstairs and going to the nightclubs. And she thought, we've got to find a better way, and she set up this company, X-Cool House, which really is doing this kind of stuff. And this was their early research for this. This building doesn't exist. But you could, I mean, watch this space. The software will be coming out in 2 or 3 years' time, which will totally change the way we operate. This is LookX, where you can look at a crumpled paper and then interpret either a building by Gehry or Zaha. And there are many ways in which this is going to really change the way that we operate. As architects, the whole process of design is going to be completely different. And I have to spend time on this. They also, it's going to go through the fabrication. They take the logic of the prefabricated modular component, a bit like a Lego brick, but a very, very sophisticated Lego brick, whereby everything can be controlled with a data-rich environment. And alongside that, there are other practices like Foster and Partners, which are using AI in a different way. They're trying to use it to speed up the process, to make things quicker, and they're also using Spot the Dog to go and check the fabrication, and loading it up with vision apparatus to see what's going on. This graph, which is a very crude graph, tells you why we are all going to be using AI. This is research done by MIT and Harvard, and the point being that on the right-hand side, that's my finger, or the green bit, that's what happens when you use AI. And the blue is what you don't use AI. So basically, in terms of both the quality, the speed, and also the quantity, there are vast improvements when you start using AI, and that's probably what's going to dictate how things are going to go. We can't afford not to use AI in the future. But there's also a negative side to all this. We have thought that the blue-collar workers, the people in the factory, would go first, but actually robots are pretty crude still. They can't operate very well, but AI is racing ahead. It's actually going to be the white-collar workers. The architects, the lawyers, the doctors who are going to be struggling because of AI. And if anything, the people working in the factory are going to be doing very well. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about that right now, but I simply say that within the profession, what we need to be doing right now is not designing another building, we need to be designing the very future of our profession, because the world is changing and changing very rapidly. So, who's afraid of AI? This is the scary bit, okay? The black mirror side of things. We got a glimpse of AI's potential, because it's happening in these labs and things we don't notice it, but there are a few big moments when we suddenly get a glimpse of its potential. This is 1997, when Garry Kasparov took on Deep Blue, the computer built by IBM. Now, Ray Kurzweil had predicted that by 2000, AI would beat the world champion at chess. He was 3 years too late. Nobody expected Garry Kasparov to lose. He was one of the greatest chess players of all time, and he himself thought it had been cheating. He thought that the computer had been cheating, but eventually he reconciled himself with the fact that AI was superior, and he makes this comment: we just have to understand that everything that we know how to do, machines will eventually do better than us. Different things at different times. There are things that AI is struggling with and things that AI is good at. Anyway, that was in some senses easy, but the challenge really was Go. Now, Go is much more complicated, even though it's straightforward. There are more potential moves in Go than there are atoms in the universe. Therefore, they had to develop a new way of operating. You couldn't just use the expert systems that we use for the game of chess. You have to go into deep learning, and that's where AlphaGo, which is developed by DeepMind in London, came in. And they played Lisa Doll, who was like the Garry Kasparov of Go. And again, nobody thought that Lisa Doll would lose. No, he's a brilliant guy. And of course, Lucy did. This is from an exhibition in London. Yesterday I was surprised after game 2. In other words, he was surprised after game 1. But today I am speechless. Why did he say he was speechless after game 2? Well, it was because of this particular move, which has gone down in history, this one here. Move 37 in game 2, which really changed the world. those who were in the gold plane nations in China and Japan and Korea suddenly realized how good AI was. And it was astonishing. Nobody normally makes this move. It's not very usual for someone to put it on to move on the fifth line, and they thought it was a mistake. They thought it was a complete mistake. In fact, here are the commentators on the match talking about this.
The Google team was talking about is this kind of about regulation, value.
That's a very surprising move.
I thought it was a mistake.
But it was no mistake. And I think the point is, so Lisa Dawes, in this comic, NASA goes showed us the moves human miracles were created, were actually conventional. I think what's significant is that AI is operating at levels we don't understand. It's got a range of operations that we can't understand. Those of you who've got dogs know that dogs have got a better sense of hearing and a better sense of smell than we have. Well, AI is off the charts, and as soon as it starts developing an IQ of 1,600 that Mobot X is going to have very soon, we won't understand what it's doing. The dumb don't know how dumb they are. So that kind of points to us, if that was impressive, then the next generation was even more terrifying in some ways. This was Earth Go Zero that took on AlphaGo, beat it 100 games to 0, but importantly, it taught itself to play Go without knowing the rules of Go. It taught itself to play Go without knowing the rules of Go. It did this through what's called reinforcement learning. But that was kind of astonishing, but even more astonishing maybe was the rate at which it taught itself to play Go. It played 4.9 million games of Go over 3 days. That sounds like a lot, but when you think about it, it really is a lot. That's 20 games of Go per second. 20 games of Go per second. Now, this is a hummingbird that's been slowed up. We have these in California. And it's been slowed up, and so it's beating its wings at 3 beats per second with its slowed up video. Imagine 20 beats per second. That's what we're talking about. And that gave us a glimpse of what's happening right now, which is why AI is so terrifying. It's got even more extreme. So this is the reason why everyone is kind of terrified, right? GPT. Now the T in GPT is the transformer, which allows it to be trained with so much data. And they are training these things with ever more data, 10 times more each year, which means over 2 years, that's 100 times more. These things are getting extremely big. They're called large language models, which doesn't sound very exciting. First of all, they're not large, they're absolutely gigantic. We're talking about trillions of bits of information and billions of parameters. And secondly, the other interesting thing about them is that they're actually not so sophisticated in the way that their code. The code is quite short, but somehow they're developing skills that they were never trained for. They've learned to understand languages, they can translate languages, they can write code, and I want to argue they can design, and they were never trained for these things. They're called emergent capabilities. And this is what's leading to people getting terrified. On the left-hand side, the letter signed by Elon Musk, asking people to stop doing this research because it's kind of getting carried away. And this is the letter that was put forward, the Future of Life Institute, and what they say. Oh, you can almost not see it in front of you. So what they're pointing towards is this doesn't mean merely a stepping back from the dangerous race to ever larger, unpredictable black box models with emerging capabilities. They're called emerging capabilities, and we don't understand how they work. Now, the term emergence is kind of used in biology for any multi-agent system. And in a sort of bottom-up way, it begins to take on a life of its own. You look at a flock of birds, what's happening basically, the birds are following very straightforward, simple instructions. Keep a certain distance from the bird on either side, and keep going in roughly the same direction at the same speed. But out of that, something emerges, a kind of choreography, a beautiful choreography of the birds that was totally unpredictable. That was unpredictable, they weren't good, and this is why they're using the term emergent. It's kind of things that had not been programmed in a bottom-up way, they're emergent in some sense. So Yuval Harari is kind of quite alarmed by that. He's basically saying that they've learned how to write, and once you can write, you have incredible control because you can persuade people to do things. I personally think they've not only learned how to write, they've also learned how to design. And these are just images done by Midjourney, but those of you you who've done Midjourney will know that you have a long prompt, maybe 50 words or something, but the only reference to architecture is minimal. I think the word I put in here was contemporary minimalist architecture. I didn't say anything about the mountains in the background, the fold in the foreground, the grass, or indeed what materials it should be. Midjourney generated. It just generated. It designed it effectively. For this one, I just put it in stainless steel kitchen. I didn't specify the bush outside or the coffee maker on the table or the painting in the background. It's quite a nice painting. I didn't specify that. It just generated, and it generated it in 3 seconds. So I think that Midjourney has learned how to design, it's got a sense of how tectonic materials go together. And this thing like a rendering, I mean, that would take us a week to do, right? It does this in 3 seconds. Now, that was terrifying enough, but what's been more terrifying is the latest thing that's been launched by OpenAI, which is called Sora, which is now text to video. Now, we've had text to video since late 2022, but they've improved by comparison. This one is a different order entirely, and it hasn't been released properly, but people have been blown away by the way that it maintains these things. That it can go for 60 seconds and keep a very consistent video going. Maybe they're cherry-picking the best examples, but we don't know. But for sure, these really good examples are offering us a glimpse of something that is truly astonishing. Absolutely astonishing. Now, the way these things are trained is very much like a large language model. Instead of using tokens for words, that's the way that they train ChatGPT, they use patches for frames in a video. But the same principle happens, and they've just brought up the entire video rights for Disney, so you can expect something astonishing to happen. And what's more, they're doing things that, again, they have to be trained to do. There's something called occlusion. Now, occlusion means when something disappears out of the frame and comes back into the frame again. You can see in this video, at this moment, it disappears and it comes back into the frame again. That is pretty astonishing. And again, these are called emergent capabilities. It's not being trained to do anything like that. It's also got, I think, an astonishing grasp of 3D. Now, not only do we see the incredible, I mean, the resolution in this image of this bird is astonishing enough in itself. But when it starts turning its head, you really get a sense it's got a grasp of 3D, a real grasp of 3D. In fact, it's got a sense of 3D rigging. You can use it to put an avatar in and so on. This is truly astonishing. We're on the cusp, I think, of getting into 3D. And of course, architecture doesn't escape either. And we've got these. This is a video. It's done on. It's a text to video. So there's no information given to it apart from maybe modeling a house or something, and it's generating all this stuff. Now, all we know is that Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, has said this, that something's going to be launched this year that's going to be truly astonishing. I don't know if it's a version of this or whether it's GPT-5, I don't know what, but watch this space. This world is speeding up. It's speeding up. So I want to then play a Jeffrey Hinton. He resigned from Google because he was so alarmed by what he was seeing in order to tell us, to warn us about AI. So this is Jeffrey Hinton, the godfather of AI, the guy who gave us ChatGPT, the guy who gave us Midjourney, Dali, and so on.
It made me realize that these digital intelligences have something we don't have that makes them much better. When one of them knows something, it can tell all the others that's what we don't have with people. So imagine you had 10,000 people, and imagine if when one person learned something, everybody knew it. You could learn a lot more stuff, right? And that's why things like ChatGPT knows like 10,000 times as much as any one person. It's because when you train it, there's lots of different copies looking at different bits of the data and learning stuff, and they can all combine what they learn instantly with a bandwidth of like trillions of bits.
So can they think?
Yes. So imagine the following scenario. I'm talking to a chatbot, and we talk for a bit, and the answers it's giving me seem a bit strange to me. And I suddenly realise that it thinks I'm a teenage girl. And I say, what demographic do you think I am? And it says it thinks I'm a teenage girl. So the question is, when I said I suddenly realised it thinks I'm a teenage girl, Was that a metaphorical use of the word think? Or was that just the same way as we use think? And I strongly believe that use of the word think, when I said it thinks I'm a teenage girl, was exactly the same way of using think as we do with people.
And so that was enough to make you say, what, this has accelerated beyond my comfort level?
I suddenly realized maybe they already are better, and making them more like real neural nets isn't the point. They're already better than us. They're a better way of doing learning. And if we make them bigger, they'll get much smarter than us. They already know more than any one person.
I understand that things could go awry, but I still think that people hear the notion of danger and they dismiss it as hyperbole.
I thought it was hyperbole for a long time because I thought these things were a long way off. I thought there will eventually be danger, but I thought focusing on it now is unnecessary because it'll be 30 to 50 years before these things get more intelligent than us. But this combination of realizing that they might have a much better way of learning than we have, because they can share knowledge instantly, and seeing things like ChatGPT or Palm or Google that can explain why a joke is funny, made me realize these things are already pretty intelligent, and if they've got a better form of intelligence than ours, then it gets to be much more urgent.
So just put some perspective, why should you listen to GPT? Well, because he's not only the godfather of AI, neural networks, he's also got a background in neuroscience, and he can relate this to the ways that his brain works. Now, I almost totally agree with him. I mean, I think he's an amazing guy. I don't totally agree with him. I don't think they can think. In fact, I would say all these terms have been inverted commas. But what he's basically saying is, first of all, he can understand. The reference to the joke is he asks Palmer how to explain a joke. He figured if he can explain a joke, he must be able to understand a joke. And he also argues with ChatGPT that it's not just predictive texting, it actually understands your question. So he thinks it's got some level of understanding. I don't think it's necessarily can think just yet, but what he's arguing is it's got a form of intelligence that is very different to human intelligence, mechanical intelligence, but it is far superior. And the issue is it can learn so much quicker. Now, we've always used the model as Moore's law. Moore's law says that basically, it was this industrialist Gordon Moore who said that the number of transistors on a circuit board would double every year and the price would come down by half for every 2 years. That was kind of, it was kind of an exponential, but it's like 1, 2, 4, 8. What he's talking about here is you're sharing knowledge with 1,000 other or 10,000 other computers at the same time. It's much bigger than that. It's a bit like, we talked in COVID, the R number was less than 1, it wasn't spreading, more than 1, it was spreading. But what if the R number was 1,000 or 10,000? So that's why we've got to pay attention to this. Anyway, then this is Yuval Harari, who's also a bit of a doomer, I think.
This is the end of human history, the end of human-dominated history. History will continue with somebody else in control. In 5 years, there'll be a technology that can make decisions independently and that can create new ideas independently. Maybe they'll be nice. Maybe they'll solve cancer and climate change, but we are not sure. I'm tending to think of it more in terms of really an alien invasion, an alien fleet of spaceships coming from planet Zircon or whatever, with highly intelligent beings. This is what we are facing, except that the aliens are not coming in spaceships from planet Zircon, they are coming from the laboratory. If the humans are divided among themselves and are in an arms race, then it becomes almost impossible to contain this alien intelligence.
So he's using the term alien intelligence as well. I don't know if you read my book, I'm sure he didn't. But so I think it's a really good term. It stops us anthropomorphizing this intelligence. It is a very, very different form of intelligence. But I think we've got to realize that we have been judging AI from our perspective. Oh, it's not sentient. It's not self-aware. It's not got consciousness. What if we would think how AI would judge us? AI would think us pretty slow and pretty stupid by comparison. So in my work, I talk about how we need to go through a second Copernican revolution. If Nicholas Copernicus had basically argued that the Earth is not the center of the universe, the solar system, that basically the Earth is going around the sun, I think we've got to recognize that we are no longer the most intelligent beings, entities, shall we say, within the universe. We've got to go through a second Copernican revolution. So just to finish off, a slightly British note, I don't know if you know this Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. This was something I was brought up with, right? And as you probably know, or some of you might know in the story, there was a massive supercomputer called Deep Thought that takes 10 million years or 7.5 million years to work out the meaning of life, the universe, and everything. And of course the answer is 42. And I think, okay, what's the question? And that's why Elon Musk, because there's a book on philosophy, you've got to get the question right to get the right answer. So then it spends another 10 million years or something working out what the question was. But my view is that actually, if ChatGPT has worked out the right code and to translate languages, it's probably worked out the human cultural genome. It's probably worked out the meanings of life, the universe, and everything. So the big difference between Deep Thought and ChatGPT, which it took 10 million years or so for it to come up with that answer, ChatGPT would come up in 3 seconds. So there's something, but of course, if you read the book, you also know on the back cover, it says, don't panic. And I think that's the kind of message that I want to leave you with. I want to just refer to Arthur C. Clarke, who actually was the advisor on that movie, 2001, Space Odyssey, that came out in 1968. Now, this was done in 1964, and what is astonishing about it, it's as though he's talking about 2024, as though he's saying the same things as Jeffrey Hinton. So it is Arthur C. Clarke.
However, the most intelligent inhabitants of that future world won't be men or monkeys, they'll be machines, the remote descendants of today's computers. Now, the present-day electronic brains are complete morons, but this will not be true in another generation. They will start to think, and eventually they will completely outthink their makers. Is this depressing? I don't see why it should be. We superseded the Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal men, and we presume we're an improvement. I think we should regard it as a privilege to be stepping stones to higher things. I suspect that organic or biological evolution has about come to its end, and we're now at the beginning of inorganic or mechanical evolution, which will be thousands of times swifter.
So, just to finish on another very British note, and carry on. And my point would be this, is that actually one thing that we do have in our favour as human beings, I mean, we are going to lose jobs, definitely. We are going to be left behind by computers. But we're very adaptive creatures, very, very adaptive creatures. Neuroscientists say our brain is plastic, that's why we can adapt. Now, if 50 years ago you'd told me that most marriages would end in divorce, I think, oh my God, society's collapsing, it's the end of the world, whatever. But now we're in a situation, 50 years later, when most marriages do end in divorce, and we're fine with it. Things are going to change. Things are going to change, and we will adapt. We will adapt. So don't worry. Keep calm and carry on. Thank you. If you want to find out about how to use AI, Digital Futures is the platform that I helped set up. It operates in 10 different languages, including Spanish, of course English. And you can find some tutorials about how to use AI there. And the point about this is these things are changing every month and day. So it's the only way to do this is to have some global platform where you can bring things. But there's also information there on the world of neuroscience, which I think is amazing, AI and neuroscience. So please have a look at Digital Futures, because that's a lot of useful information.
Muchas gracias. Vamos a abrir un espacio para preguntas y le voy a pedir al doctor Daniel Dow que nos acompañe. Nos podemos sentar si quieren. Entonces, si tienen alguna pregunta que le quieran hacer llegar, con mucho gusto se la planteamos. Y si no, bueno, pues para esto Dani y yo somos bastante buenos haciendo preguntas. Así que por favor, si tienen alguna cuestión, pueden levantar la mano, les acercamos el micrófono. Si es necesario, la plantean en español y traducimos sin problema.
Adelante. Yeah. Thank you. Do you think that AI is going to I don't know, how I can say it.
You can speak Spanish, I can speak English.
Yeah, no problem. Do you think that we are going to, like, I think a lot of people is afraid of losing their jobs with this thing of AI, but also I think that sometimes when we think about AI, it's like AI is everything, but the thing is that we must learn how to use it instead of being afraid of it. So I don't know, and my question is most like, what do you think about these people thinking about, I'm afraid of AI takes my job? I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. What is interesting is that most people working in the field, I heard this last week, oh no, it's not there to replace people, it just helps people, you know? And if anything, the only people going to replace, they say, those who use AI will replace those who don't use AI. That sounds very comforting, right? Very comforting. But you think of that graph I showed you, right? And I showed you the green and the blue side of things. Essentially, it can do 40% better. So in other words, it's not a one-for-one thing. Not one person using AI is going to replace one person not using AI. And it also depends on the task, right? But there are many things it's not very good at AI. There are many things it's very good at. I mean, frankly, I wouldn't want to be working in rendering because LookX can do it all, right? So, but the point is, as soon as you understand that it's not a one-for-one relationship, it's probably one person using AI can do the job of 1.4. I've actually heard the 5 number being given before, I'm not quite sure what's right or not. Then you realize what's going to happen. Now, what that means basically, and we'll have to adapt to that socially, economically, and politically. I don't know how the state is going to adapt to it. Socialism is a bad word, but you're going to have some universal basic income. I don't know how you're going to tax these guys because they're very good at evading taxes already. The idea is you tax Google, you tax Microsoft, and you can share these things around. But the important thing, I think, is to be able to adapt to a world in which maybe we don't constitute our identity through our jobs. All these we lessen. Now you might be an architect, if that's what you do, 5 days or 7 days or whatever, a week. But maybe it's going to be less. Maybe you're not going to be working all night and all-nighters, that kind of thing. And I think we'll adapt to it. You know, it's that history's told us we will adapt. So, but it's important to recognise that, to be prepared. You know. And I don't know what the answer is, but all I would say is the comment that Derrida used to make is that if you're aware of a problem, it becomes a different sort of problem. It's not a problem by which you are trapped, but a problem with which you can deal. So I get very concerned by all these architects saying, no, don't worry. I think they're putting it, like ostriches putting their head in the sand. We do have to think about this. You know, and I think that looking back at the time when I was a student in Cambridge in the 1980s, and when CAD software was just coming along, and we had a professor there who told us not to use the computer for design, right? So the bad students didn't use the computer. Follows the good students use the computer, then they would do this overlay. It was hand-drawn, fuzzy drawing as though they'd done it themselves. And what happened? The bad students were unemployed because you literally had to be able to use the computer in the offices today. And I must say that I've seen offices take this much more seriously than education. Much more seriously. You have to survive. And Foster, Zaha, whatever, they're focusing on every single practice. But you tend to get, in academia, you get very progressive schools. I mean, I work with IAC in Barcelona. Great, very progressive. But, you know, there are other places that aren't so. The famous case there was one professor who would fill out an audience in the first year he was teaching. And then final years, when he retired, there were 6 people in the front row. He said, I don't understand why it's so empty. I'm teaching exactly the same material I used to. Well, the world moves on. You know, maybe he was trained in Le Corbusier 30 years ago, but we've got to adapt and survive and change. In fact, the one area that they really are alert to this is are the construction companies. Turner Construction in New York, they're absolutely on the ball. Ferrovial, which is a Spanish company, mega company, they are the most advanced. So I think we've got to be aware of this thing and deal with it. Yeah.
Thank you, Neil.
Hello, I'm Elena. I I admire your work very much, and I think that you said AI is also can be used to empower people, and is like an extended intelligence that we can use to make our work better, our life better, and the world better. So what interests me the most is how can we use this AI generation of models and architectural forms to address the climate change in our practice, in our architectural practice.
Yeah, I mean, just to say that I think that the point about, in the introduction to my book, I was saying that this thing, this device, the iPhone, there was an article that came out by a philosopher called David Chalmers and a cognitive philosopher called Andy Clark in the 1990s. It's called the extended mind. And even though we didn't have these things then, what they were arguing is we have these devices that become prostheses that we can use to think with. And we put our phone numbers on it and things, and it becomes an extended part of the mind. So I was simply arguing it's not us versus AI, it's AI as a form of extension of human capacity. So therefore, extended intelligence or intelligent augmentation is the term that being used increasingly. I mean, I'm not sure exact answers. I mean, what I will say is that, first of all, is that they're using AI. The question I was in a conference about cities on Smart Cities on Thursday, and I asked the question, what will the city of the future look like? Well, it's going to look pretty much like the city of today, frankly. It's not going to be like Patrick Schumacher's version of parametricism. It won't look like that. There'll be a few new buildings, but everything we retrofitted with AI will have a kind of, they'll be using digital twins to monitor the performance of buildings and using AI to optimize the performance of that. They'll be using AI to sort out the traffic jams, especially in Mexico City, right? They're already doing that in China. So it's going to be in that area. Now, at the moment, frankly, AI is not very good in terms of energy consumption because there are these huge data farms that are consuming vast amounts of energy, but they're working at that in different sort of ways, and that becomes an issue. We should ignore that, for sure. But I imagine in the future it'll eventually be that kind of thing, because I think the real problem architects have, I get what I say here, because maybe there's a certain Italian architect in the Politecnico di Milano who builds these kind of bosco verticali, where he puts trees on balconies and thinks he's solving the problem. That is greenwashing. That is absolute greenwashing. The way that we can use this, I was talking to a guy who was designing ships, boats, and he actually came out of the America's Cup logic, where they use AI to make these incredible experiments, right? And now he's applying that to commercial shipping. And they are reducing the energy in ships by 20% through using this. And actually what is interesting is when they're designing the hull of a ship, they don't draw anything. It comes out of data, and they optimize it, and they're making substantial increases there. So I don't know if in particular, it's not my area for how it's going to operate, but basically we could use it in many ways to try and solve that kind of problem. But let's not think it's going to be about greenwashing. I live in LA. They had a street, they're going to make a green street, so they planted trees there, and they painted it green. I mean, how ridiculous do you get? Actually, that AI with the hull, it was nothing to do with greenery, but it's reduced the drag and all these other things and produced a much more effective thing. So, I think we're going to get there. It's going to be able to allow us to optimize the design of buildings, first of all, in terms of the performance of the building, and then to control afterwards. And I think that's one of the areas in terms of jobs we have to move into. Not just design the building, but also to design the post-construction operation of the building. And it's interesting that we're already anticipating that, so we'll be doing that. But I don't know the answer exactly, but I'm sure that people who know more than I will be on the hunt for things.
Lo voy a decir en español para que lo entiendan. Bueno, primero, antes que nada, gracias por venir a dar esta plática. Quisiera preguntarte, bueno, entendemos que ahora vamos a tener que adaptar todo nuestro estilo de vida y también nuestro estilo de trabajo, de cómo nos educamos y cómo aprendemos también desde la escuela y también en el trabajo para poder aplicar estas nuevas tecnologías y no quedarnos rezagados. Mi pregunta es,
¿crees que el siguiente paso realmente sea como hacernos este tipo de extensión que sea ya de todos los días? Porque si estamos pensando en eso en el futuro, entonces estaremos ya también pensando en implantes, chips que puedan también mantenernos conectados a este tipo de tecnologías para poder ser ultra eficientes, ¿no? Entonces, lo que estoy planteando es cuál es el siguiente paso, qué cree usted que podamos también ahorita nos acaba de prevenir ir aprendiendo esto, pero también qué podríamos imaginarnos que podría ser el siguiente paso, ya tener chips, ser como personas cyborgs, y si tenemos que hacer esto, entonces estaríamos teniendo que hablar ya de poner reglas éticas o morales dentro de todas estas tecnologías. Gracias.
Thanks for the question. That was a big question. So first of all, in terms of education, I mean, we actually have a session on digital futures on Saturday, and if you go to, it's not translated to Spanish yet. Hopefully soon, everything will be translated in Spanish instantaneously. But it's actually quite crucial because, as I say, I don't think education on the whole is taking this seriously enough. Now, we're at the forefront. We are preparing the students who are going to become the architects of tomorrow. It's even more important to address this. And I teach a course on the theory of AI, and it's super popular. Everyone really wants to find out about that, and it's a super popular course, and I think everyone should be learning about it and finding out about it. So what is the future? You know, what is the difficulty about the future is that if you make your prediction wrong, everyone laughs at you. It's stupid. But then if you get a prediction right, if you invent the iPhone, someone will say, oh, well, someone was going to invent the iPhone. There's nothing special. Well, it was, right? But the problem about inventing the iPhone, or the problem about inventing anything, is you don't know, you can invent a thing, but you don't know how, you can't predict how people are going to use it. So for example, when they invented the mobile phone, it was intended for rich businessmen. And the idea was the rich businessmen would just use it. But then the rich businessman gave the phone to their daughter, to his daughter, and said, you're going out to sea, give me a call when you want me to pick you up, I'll come and pick you up. So all of a sudden, social patterns changed, and we really can't predict that. And we're discovering already that in terms of the creative way in which people are using AI is just astonishing. So it's difficult to predict how it's going to go, but I do think that one of the interesting developments, there's a guy called Mustafa Suleyman. Mustafa Suleyman was one of the guys who launched DeepMind in London, which is really important company. And he's now got a company in Silicon Valley where you have your personal intelligence. You have your own personal AI that learns about you and gives you advice the whole time. I mean, that'd be incredible. And I don't know how it's going to operate, but I think that would be extraordinary. Is this an alter ego of some kind? How do we operate in that sort of world? So, I mean, for sure we'll absorb it. It will become part of our world, and we'll use it in creative ways, but I'm not quite sure what the answer is. But I don't think we should be terrified by this thing. I mean, one of the comments that I was studying in Cambridge, right, and we were all reading Heidegger, and Heidegger said that technology is alienating and whatever. That's why we couldn't use computers in the studio, right? But we adapt to these things. We get used to them, you know? And in my book, I talk about the example of the Eiffel Tower. Now, when the Eiffel Tower was first built, there was an intellectual philosopher called Guy de Maupassant. And Guy de Maupassant would have his lunch on the second floor of the Eiffel Tower because it was the only place in Paris from which you couldn't see the Eiffel Tower. They hated the Eiffel Tower. Now, we love it. So I think it's going to be part of our life, and we'll learn to work with it in new and creative ways, but you can't predict that. But let's see.
Hi, thank you. Well, my question is this one. What's the difference between AI creativity and human creativity? Do you think that is our ability of being able to feel, of being sensible, the key to surpass AI?
That's a good question. I'm very careful about being saying something too controversial here. But I once put something on Instagram because people were telling me, oh, AI is never going to get anywhere because it hasn't got sensitivity of human beings. It's just a machine and no idea. Well, I put this beautiful image, right? And I said, was this designed by a very sensitive human being or by a completely insensitive machine? And of course, it was a beautiful image. And so my friend Wang says, I don't care about little sensitivities and things, It's really a question of whether the design is good. And I think that's the real problem. We're stuck in this thing. We are sensitive, computers are insensitive. I had a lot of my students, I teach a course, I don't get them to write essays because they can write with ChatGPT, so I get them to do a video and use AI for that thing. And unfortunately, they went to ChatGPT for it. And ChatGPT says, oh, yeah, computers aren't as empathetic as humans, nowhere near as good. So, whatever. And most of my students just followed this. But there were two girls, female students, and they said, no, I think actually you can simulate emotions very well. And our concern is actually that it really will simulate so well that we'll have a bunch of AI girlfriends out there, and nobody will have sex, and nobody will be procreating, it will be the end of civilization. Now, that's the kind of thinking I believe in, and I absolutely totally agree with it. I happen to have some friends who go to MIT Media Lab who work in that area, like we can simulate emotions. So I think we've got to be a bit more candid on that, and we've got to step out of our high, looking down on AI and begin to realize and appreciate where we are. So, but creativity, okay. If AlphaGo could come up with that move, was it being creative? No, it was just doing the search. Now, the term creativity, I'm going to be provocative, just to be provocative. Why not? The term creativity was actually developed in 1929. It's not a very old term. And when you start thinking about it, I mean, it's a kind of magical term. Oh, you're so creative. You try and get someone to define it. What do you mean by creativity? Nobody really can define it, right? And the real danger is perhaps there's no such thing as creativity. In other words, we call it creativity, but let's say, for example, I always compare it to magic. Now, is there such thing as magic? Well, we've got magicians, right? They're doing all these things, pulling rabbits out of hats. Is that magic? No. They're considering the operations, what's happening. And we think it's magic. Oh, that's so magical. Now, let's just, for a moment, think, well, if we were more like a computer, more rigorous in our searches, if we were more like AlphaGo, and we're coming up with a solution, would we not say that is creative? But is it creative? Is creativity like magic just a kind of deception? Now, I don't know the answer to that, but I think we have to ask some very tough questions. Of course, we use creativity as a figure of speech. We still use magic as a figure of speech. And maybe we use it conveniently, but I would think that creativity is a bit of a myth, personally. I think inventiveness is something, and, I think that's one thing, but, actually, okay, so here's my thought, okay? I think that AI is a very useful mirror in which to understand what it is to be human. And that's my main interest, actually. I'm interested in trying to understand who we are, and there's the world of neuroscience and AI has this huge overlap. I don't know if you know Anil Seth, but he's the most interesting neuroscientist right now. Anil Seth, he basically thinks that our whole view of the world is a controlled hallucination. Unbelievable. He did a PhD in AI, and he's now a neuroscientist, very famous neuroscientist. His book called Being You is very interesting. Now, the head of DeepMind, Demis Hassabis, did a PhD in neuroscience before going into AI. That world is super interesting. Now, I'd say, from a theoretical perspective, that is the most interesting area right now. And we have the same vision on digital futures, a whole series looking at AI and neuroscience. So I think what's going to be interesting is how we can see what it is to be human in the mirror of AI. And just to go back to, I don't know if you've seen the movie Blade Runner, but it's a famous movie, artists love it, right? And Rutger Hauer, who plays the lead replicant in that, afterwards, he said, that wasn't a movie about replicants. It was a movie about what it is to be human. And I strongly think that we are going to find something about that. Now, the problem is, of course, we don't understand either the human brain or the neural network, both are black boxes. We don't understand emergence either. It happens everywhere, we can't explain it. But nonetheless, we can conjecture. We can be like Arthur C. Clarke back in 1964 and imagine the future. And I think that's where it's going to be really provoking us to think about ourselves in interesting new ways, personally.
Neil, thank you so much for being here and sharing these interesting and clarifying ideas. From now on, I'm going to use alien intelligence. So a few years ago, I read this book, The Aesthetics of Architecture, and I found it so insightful because it was like a warning against this process of focusing only on aesthetics. So now, how would you say your thought have evolved through these years? Because just by the fact of calling this alien intelligence, it's like a difference, or it's like another category that makes us feel maybe like so separated from architecture in this very deep human way of doing things, architecture as an art, and this other thing that is superficial, artificial, or alien.
Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed aesthetics. Actually, there was a second book I produced after that called Camouflage, which was trying to respond to aesthetics, but it didn't come out in Spanish, unfortunately. But anyway, it's more dialectical. So it was, I mean, the book with aesthetic was a polemic, right? I was arguing one side of the coin, extremely forcefully. And there was another side of the coin. So, I think what is interesting now is how we are seeing some of the thought that's coming out of French post-structuralist philosophy is actually echoed by what we're finding in AI. So, for example, everyone talks about bias now. Well, actually the bias comes from us. The bias in AI comes from us. If you Google the word nurse, I guarantee that 99% of the images are going to be female, right? And that notion of bias, that's what Derrida was talking about in terms of, we have a constructed way of looking at the world where we have privileged hierarchies. We privilege one over the other, male over female, practice over theory, and so on. So it's kind of like in a way like that. But also this idea of in anesthetics, we see the world through a lens, a rose-tinted lens. Well, actually, there's a whole world of neuroscience, which I haven't gone into today, where it argues the same thing. We see something, we predict things, or see things in the way that we train to see things. So, for example, if I were to ask you how many red colours there are on a rainbow, anybody here, I'm sure everyone would say, 7, like all school kids do, right? But we know they're not 7 colours in a rainbow. There's an infinite spectrum of colours. So we've been conditioned to see the world through a certain lens. Now, without going into much detail, that is what neuroscience is telling us, predictive perception. We see things and we've been trained to see the world. And it's very, very close to the arguments in anesthetics. And I think it's super interesting. There's a guy called Memo Actor. And I was talking to him, I said, he has a lot of art installations looking at how we train to see the world. So in a way, we are not so dissimilar. And I'm not saying we are the same at all, but there's something similar about how neural networks are trained to see the world. You saw that deep dream when you read dogs and serpents and everything. We also do that. Predictive perceptions about that. So have a look at Anil Seth, A-N-I-L-S-E-T-H. He has got a TED talk that's got 15 million hits, and you know why when you see it. It's brilliant. Predictive perception, which is coming out of Daniel Dennett's theories. Super interesting kind of new world there. So if you're into theory, that's the stuff you should look at now. It's super interesting. And I think there's a whole branch about to burst out about neuroscience. In a way, I did a lot of stuff after that and in the camouflage, looking at psychoanalysis. Now, psychoanalysis is beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. But it's not proven in any way. I mean, Freud supposes we've got an unconscious, and never writes about it. What you're getting now, I don't want to privilege science, there's a limitations to science, but there are trying to test things out with experiments in some way now, and we're getting another layer to it. So, I don't know. I mean, I can see a connection between what Slavoj Žižek's talking about and what's coming out of neuroscience right
now. Muchas gracias, Neil. Yo vengo leyendo algunos de tus textos desde la anestética de la arquitectura. Justamente en ese texto hay una idea que me borró la cabeza sobre cómo hay una explicación desde la arquitectura nazi hasta Disney, y de cómo Disney es un cascarón de culturas puestos todos en un mismo espacio para que lo consuma un tipo de persona, pero que nunca conecte con el insight detrás de cada una de esas culturas, ¿no? Y entonces, 20 años hacia acá de ese libro, tenemos una inteligencia artificial que lo que más se le critica en cuestión creativa es que está aplanando el sesgo, ¿no? O sea, que si nuestra cultura tiene un sesgo para ver las cosas y la inteligencia artificial está llevando todo a ese sesgo, mi pregunta es, ¿qué va a pasar con la diversidad que de por sí ya se estaba perdiendo? O sea, en México tenemos una carrera de toda la vida de perder signos culturales, es la historia de nuestro país, ¿no? Perder un montón de cosmovisiones que se aíslan porque no supimos cómo integrarlas a nuestra forma de reproducirnos, ¿no? De cómo meterla al capitalismo. Entonces mi pregunta es, ¿de qué manera podría la inteligencia artificial ser más inteligente con lo que no está dentro del sesgo? ¿Cómo podríamos recuperar o cómo podríamos cuidar lo que de por sí la cultura está aniquilando? Yo me imagino una inteligencia artificial que nos permita entrar a un museo que no solo nos muestre ruinas arqueológicas, sino que también nos enseñe una cosmovisión de lo que pudieron haber sido como otros espacios activos. Entonces no sé si alguna vez has pensado como en esa cuestión de cómo hay personas que están quedando fuera de la inteligencia artificial, como el caso de que había personas de color que no las podía detectar los primeros modelos de inteligencia y que tuvo que haber un reajuste de la base de datos para poder incluir otro tipo de personajes. Entonces, bueno, eso es sobre la diversidad.
Thank you. You know, the bias, say, is an issue that comes from us. Now, I actually think you could recalibrate a machine to recognize African American people, but you can't recalibrate people's minds. And so I believe more in that. So but one thing about AI is that I think that in terms of it is actually quite universal. It's pretty much free, unlike a robotic arm. Most universities, probably in Latin America, can't afford these things. You know, AI is pretty much free, and that hopefully will actually help in some ways. I mean, my hope is that it'll help to broaden understanding, you know, and we can convey information much better. I remember in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, they had these things called bagel fish you put in your ear, and it would translate automatically. But AI will be able to do that soon. And what I'm interested in, I've come from an old-fashioned left-wing background in Europe, right? I'm interested in how we can democratize things. You know, that's why Digital Futures exists. You know, we have a platform, and we just with COVID, we went online. We realized afterwards we could break down social, economic, and political barriers through this platform and keep everyone informed across the world. We have followers in Iraq, in Bangladesh, in Kenya, many poor countries, and that's what we're trying to do to democratize education. And I think that as soon as we get to a situation where we can translate languages as well through that, we could get there. But so I'm optimistic. I mean, it's funny because because I was a pessimist, right? Someone went to ChatGPT and said, "Is Neil Leach more positive or negative?" So he's 66% positive. But I don't know, maybe because I'm British, I like the kind of dark side of things. But you know, one thing I'd say is that there are things, and I think anesthetics was touching upon a critical culture we mustn't forget, because there are things they were saying in the 30s with the birth of fascism that are absolutely relevant today. What Siegfried Kracauer was talking about in the mass order, I don't know if you know his work, but it's like Trump. It's like Trump has become this religious icon almost, and it's very, very disturbing. Like whatever. Anyway, so there's a lot there which I think could be useful. So something else I want to say. I think we could use this. It's a question of how you use a tool, and I think you should use a tool to. I mean, one point is that if you don't use it, grasp it, and understand it, someone else is going to use it for a very kind of capitalistic kind of way. We should take charge of it and try and use it to improve the world in important ways. Just, okay, another thought came to me was, yeah, in terms of fascism, because I wrote this chapter, which was very controversial. It's called The Architect as Fascist, and I said I said every dictator, like Mussolini or Stalin or Ceausescu, is a would-be architect or urban planner. And every architect is would-be fascist. Netanyahu studied architecture at MIT, right? Okay, so, but okay, right. So you see the articulation of what I was saying in the line, right? That thing in Saudi Arabia. And I was teasing Michel Goffin because he went to a reception for some things. And I said, how can you know that's the most unenvironmental thing? Yes, some of my friends are doing it, right? I mean, and it's so interesting. That is complete aesthetics, right? Making a 500 kilometer long building through the desert. That's exactly what I was talking about in terms of aesthetics. It doesn't do anything. In fact, it's been dressed up as the most environmentally responsible. False. It's not at all right. It's sustainable. And so that persists. And I think the lessons of the 30s of what Benjamin was talking about, what Krakow was talking about, absolutely relevant today. So in many ways, more relevant. So what I would say, I've imagined it as aesthetics, but don't think it's a historical book because it's still there, and its message is still there. You can see it in Trump, you can see it in Disney, you can see it in everything else.
Gracias. Hello, I am Jimena Torre. I am a professor at this school, and I have an annual scholarship with the American schools of Fontainebleau. They are schools, a music conservatory. It's a summer program. It's a music conservatory and architecture program that happen at the same time. And they happen at Fontainebleau Castle in France. And they have been going on for 100 years, more or less. The objective of this program is to invite young students or young architects and musicians to stay open to other forms of expression. And everything that happens there happens without a computer. Computers are not allowed in the program. They do everything by hand. So I'm very interested in education stuff and creativity and everything that has to do with it. I have to say that I came here really eager to listen to this conference, but I'm leaving a bit disappointed. I was expecting to hear the why and the what for. I heard a lot of astonishing, amazing, and those kinds of adjectives, but I didn't listen why and what for, because amazing and astonishing is what you can feel or see with a monkey, with a circus monkey, right? So it's astonishing, it's amazing, yeah, for a computer, for a software, but not for what human beings can do. I mean, it's the same that a human being can do. AI, I feel, it's not addressing real problems of society. It's not addressing what do we do with trash, what do we do with contaminated water, what do we do with contaminated oceans, right? So doing this design that you showed is something that any architect can do. So first question is, I was very surprised that you said that they can do better in terms of quality. In terms of being faster and cheaper, yeah, you don't need to pay salaries to people to do it. Right? It's just a computer that does it, the software. And it will be 100 times faster, yes, but better in quality. Why? What are the scales that you use to measure quality, being better at what AI does? And the second question, saying keep calm and adapt, is that kind of ideas that capitalism and capitalists adore, right? So adapt. What if we don't adapt? What if we, like the American Guild of Actors, say no? We will make laws that don't harm us, that don't harm our work, our rights, our living, and then we will use AI after those terms are set first. Sorry, it's a long question.
There are many questions in that. First of all, in terms of quality, I was just referring to the findings of some research that was done by MIT and Harvard sociologists. I don't know how. It's published, that work, and I don't know exactly how they looked at quality. All I would say, I would disagree with one thing very fundamentally. I do think it's unbelievable what you can do. I think maybe you need to try it out to see what you can do with it. It's just astonishing, personally. But you're right to ask the question why. I think that's the important thing. Jean-François Lyotard asked this question in his famous book on the postmodern condition that was commissioned by the government of Quebec, about education. And he said the problem is, this was written in the 60s, that everything's about how much and so on, and then the question of why is being left out. So I totally agree that we have to use the question. We have to look at that question of why. But I can see the why, and maybe I should address that more. What I would say is I think it's a myth to think that somehow well, humans, when we work with pencils, we're working with a tool. We're still working with a tool. And AI is a tool also, just maybe a more sophisticated tool. So I don't think there's any real difference fundamentally between a pencil and I was actually very good at drawing a pencil a long time ago. But no, I just think that it's really a question of how you use that tool and for what and why. No, absolutely why. And I think it's been used in all sorts of ways that are going to make the world better. I think, for example, in medicine, you've got a doctor who's I go to my doctor, he's got 20 years of experience, very good doctor. But if a doctor's got an AI, he's got access to all the medical records throughout history, of course you'll come up with a better result. They're discovering things in science that already been, what they're doing in deep mind in terms of folding, I'm going out of my territory here, but they're making huge developments in terms of science. It's making a huge impact, and it will have a huge impact on every single area. It's an augmentation to our critical processes. No, and I think we have to be critical. We have to remain critical. We have to ask questions why. But I'm more optimistic, and this is going to enhance our critical capacities. I'm not saying this is going to give into it and so on. Not at all. Quite the opposite. We see the possibility of using it for our advantage. This is a comment that Douglas Rushkoff made when digital stuff came around in the first place. He said, everyone, it's going to be great, it's going to make it more better. And all we got was spam, right? And he said, it's our responsibility to take charge of these technologies, to use them for the benefit of society. We just leave it to the commercial world. Of course it will be used by Disney and whatever else. But I think it's a really potentially very, very powerful critical tool. And I have a background in critical theory. I wrote this book, Rethinking Architecture, which provided looking at French philosophy for how we could adopt tools, thinking tools, that would advance architecture. But in architecture, we don't like to be, we're in a bubble. We don't like criticism outside. We have a way of doing it. I would say we need to penetrate, we need to burst that bubble. We need to bring in these critical tools from critical theory to make architecture more critical, not to destroy it, but to use the ideas of, Adorno to critique our flows, to use the ideas of Frederick Jameson to critique the ideas of Kenneth Frampton, all those uncritical discourses going on in architecture, and we could use those tools from theory. I think this is the same for AI. It is actually potentially a thinking tool. It's actually potentially a theoretical tool. So I would say is that you're right to have those concerns, but I would just be a little bit open-minded about the potential of this tool, because it is astonishing what it can do, and it's a question of how you use it and for what. The problem is, of course, that the tool can be misused by anyone. There was Stuart Russell, the guy, AI specialist in Berkeley, produced a movie called Slaughterbots, where he said the real danger is having autonomous drones killing people. Well, of course it's a real danger, and we should be pretty aware of that. All I can say is I was expecting that in Ukraine, because Putin has said whether rules AI rules the world. I was expecting slaughterbots in Ukraine, and I can be thankful possibly all that money set aside for AI research was probably going into oligarchs' mansions and things. But no, it is a danger. And the problem is, though, is that how do you control that? How do you control it? I mean, we can't stop Putin invading Ukraine, then how are we going to stop people using AI in the wrong way? So there are some important ethical issues there, but I would say people are open-minded and try it, because I come from that background. I was a translator of Alberti, and I learned when I was translating Alberti that the computer was unbelievably effective. This was back in 1988, Alberti translation came. Translated from the Latin. I was working in the computer science department, seeing all these weird idiots doing different things. What I found was by using the computer, the old days you type it by typewriter, maybe typex it, you couldn't do much. And Joseph Rickler said to me, okay, read this book and do it in this style. Forget the book. A style, a way of expression came out of the way of using the computer, where you continually revise the text, critically, questioning, challenging, improving it by doing that. So at that point I thought, oh, this tool is going to be incredibly successful in architecture for allowing us to be more critical and to produce better things. So I was blown away by it. So you might say, what's the difference between Alberti and AI? Well, firstly, I think Alberti could be interested in AI this time, but also the name Alberti begins in A and ends in I.
Thank you so much for the question. I think we're coming to an end now. I think we have 10 minutes. I want to ask you another question regarding to one of the questions in your presentation about when artificial intelligence can do everything architects can do. Does that mean the end of architecture, or does that mean that we discover something new yet to come for architecture? We shouldn't be afraid in terms of seeing the end of it, but another beginning, being free from the current responsibilities we have to dedicate ourselves to other things. I think that you agree that this reinvention is very much needed. You said it, now the big task is not designing buildings, but redesigning architecture. And I think the challenges that artificial intelligence presents for architecture, it also presents for all other professions and disciplines. And ultimately, when we take all of these together, I wonder if the question isn't if AI is forcing us to redefine what being human is. I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, there's several questions in one. First of all, I would say that actually one thing, what's interesting is how it's changed the way that we do design. I'm not even sure what design makes any sense anymore, because increasingly when you work in computation, you create a search space and you generate outcomes, and then you find a way of evaluating whether it's acceptable or not. You find a way of doing that. And actually, so maybe the terminology, we need a new lexicon. Do we use the word design, or do we use the word generate? Do we use the word outcome or architecture? Well, or design? But what's interesting is that you still have to have a good eye. And this is what I'm trying to suggest about that thing. You cannot produce good stuff on picture unless you know what is good, because you select out the best one and then try and read it further. So it actually, I think it's going to privilege that kind of discerning the good eye. It's kind of interesting because I wasn't designing for years. I was a designer. I was writing books of theory at the time. And I get back at it because of picture. I think I've got a good eye, so I can use picture. But it is changing the nature, the balance of how we were doing. But I had a comment when I was in Austria a few months ago. Someone was saying, what's going to happen to creativity when Midjourney does it all for us? Well, listen, if Midjourney can do what you can do, then he's not very creative. That's what I was saying. You know, it's really a question of how you use that human creativity to think what you can do with those tools in a new way. And that's what I think is the challenge. So, you know, I mean, there's a whole new chapter that's opening up. It's not, as you say, it's not the end of something, it's the beginning of something else. So I think we need to really think about that and to look at the possibilities. The really creative people will do some incredible, astonishing things with this tool. I have no question, no question. And hopefully critical as well. So what was the final thing the question say?
I mean, if AI, as you say, on one hand can be understood as alien, but on the other hand as a mirror of ourselves, what is left of us when AI completely represents us? How does it push us to ask, what does it mean to be human?
I can answer that. I just come up with the whole time. I mean, every time I'm just, it hits me. Creativity. What is creativity? What is all these things? As you're going through this, the whole time you find yourself about the same question: what is it to be human? And that is my real interest. You know? It's thinking about what we are. I think that's the same as what Jeffrey Hinton went away. They want to understand how we operate. And I think in the end, that what links, say, neuroscience with AI, they're just intelligence. For me, the side, they're just intelligence. And that's what fascinates me. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I think this is an incredible new domain. It's opening up, and I'm optimistic because I think it is a critical. And I think if we use critically, it will come up with good results. Now, criticism, I think, was bad. It's not. The whole purpose of critical theory is you see a problem, you identify that problem, and then you can improve something based on seeing that problem. So I think that's the nature of it, where we can see it as helping. I don't know. It's a new horizon.
I would like to propose Neil a prompt, as he was Neil GPT. What would be the best options or the best recommendations for the different schools, since your background is teaching not in one place, but in different places, different countries, different cultures? What would be the best recommendations to make to evolve the education promptly in Latin America and the rest of the world? What is the best thing to do in terms of architectural education so we can suit the student expectations with this tool so they don't go waste?
So, I think there's something very special about an architectural education, because we're not especially taught it, but we develop certain skills that are unique. I don't think any other discipline quite has that. We can design, we can think three-dimensionally, and we understand material behaviors. Now, what is interesting is we're all kind of pushed towards buildings, because that's what we do. But actually, what I've come across in my different disciplines, and there are two architectural design issues, so where I realized that there are people going into the space industry who are architects, who are working in space, and NASA. And there's a whole thing on space architecture, which see all the people who are going into that. There's also something I think called 3D printed body architecture with Benas Farahi, and we realized that we could do things like, working with Iris van Herpen, we could 3D print things for the fashion industry, and they didn't have those skills. So there's a skill set there, and I think that I always think about other architectures. In other words, we don't see architecture in isolation, we see it within a broader spectrum, and we can do other things, and you can certainly do that on Midjourney. I don't know if it's beautiful, I can do fashion, I don't know if it's good fashion or something. But I think that architecture as a discipline has got to open up that possibility, and that's why we were talking about this earlier about the two famous schools in Cambridge and Massachusetts, MIT and Harvard. Now, I taught at GST, and frankly, I think they're going backwards. They want to get back to architecture as capital A, as though history's going to go backwards. It doesn't go backwards. Meanwhile, in MIT, they've got this new school. It's called MAD, I'm not sure what MAD stands for, but it's a kind of broad interdisciplinary design thing, and where they put architecture alongside other disciplines. And I think that is the way forward, how we can use that imagination that we've got as architects to really think through these questions and step outside the box. And when I say step outside the box, it doesn't just mean designing shoes rather than buildings. It means trying to use our imagination to make the world a better place. I don't know if people know this, but it was an architect who set up tables, right? You have to think in terms of systems, right? What I discovered is that we have a way of seeing things. We draw diagrams. No one else can somehow do that. And even digital future, because that was like an architectural design as such, you know, and really use that architectural imagination inventively to think about the future. So I was once asked, someone asked me from the RIBA, how do you define architecture? And I said, apologies to all those who build buildings here. I said, architecture is less about the design of buildings than about imagining a better future world. And that's been my project for the whole time. And how is that world be better? It's better in many ways, but it's kind of writing books on theory that kind of challenge you to think about things or whatever. So I hope that this tool will also be another way to maybe imagine a better future world, because the world isn't equal. It needs to be world. You know, we don't sit back, it's going to be techno by corporate concern. So how do we use our architectural imaginations to change things? I was actually just a confession or something. I was taught in a monastery by Benedictine monks, right? And they wore black and had no money. So I thought, I'm going to go an architect, right? But no, I think one thing they taught me really was very interesting, was to say, you know, we don't be so obsessed like possessions. We don't actually own anything. We borrow things until we die, then we give them up. So in other words, don't be obsessed with possessions and how big your car is, your house is, but think about how you can make the world a better place. And I think that's really what education is about, provoking people. And hopefully you guys will go out there and change the world.
Muchas gracias, Gil. Thank you very much, Gil. Invitamos a la maestra Isaura, por favor, a que entregue un reconocimiento que tenemos preparado.
So, keep calm and change the world. Vamos a otorgarle este reconocimiento a Neil. Dice Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, la Facultad de Arquitectura, School of Architecture, otorga el presente reconocimiento a Neil Leach por impartir la conferencia Arquitectura en la era de la inteligencia artificial. Por miras a la oral escrito, Ciudad Universitaria, Ciudad de México, el 15 de abril de 2024, y lo firmamos la maestra Isaura González Rodríguez, secretaria académica de la Facultad de Arquitectura, y el maestro Enrique Soto Alba, secretario general de la Facultad de Arquitectura, en ausencia de nuestro director. So here, this is for you. And also I'll be present. So for your copy, and also a book. I was asking which books do we have in English by now, and this is an interesting book of Mr. Stone Cutting Artistry of Benjamin Ibarra Sevilla. So it's ancestry technology, but interpreted by technology of now. So as you say, so technology has to be to educate better people.
También quería comentarles a nombre de Bitácora, revista de arquitectura, que en realidad esto surgió por la iniciativa de Nadia Benavides, que es la editora de Bitácora, y que bueno, vamos a tener un número que va a salir pronto que es sobre inteligencia artificial, donde va a aparecer un artículo de Leach, también hay uno de Tao, y bueno, pues para que se acerquen y vean el número, que va a ser muy interesante. Entonces, pues nada, muchas gracias a todos por venir y esperamos vernos en otra ocasión.
Muy bueno, claro.